We'll also highlight the importance of robust policy frameworks and governance structures in safeguarding polar regions, which are pivotal in controlling global sea level rise. We are honored to have an exceptional panel of experts with us today. Professor Martin Siegert, glaciologist from the University of Exeter, Ms. Pam Pearson, Director of the International Cryosphere Climate Initiative, Dr. James Kirkham, Chief Science Advisor and Coordinator at the International Cryosphere Climate Initiative, and Ms. Deborah Ten, Director and Head of CWR. Moderating this critical discussion is Professor Adrian Law, Director of the Coastal Protection and Flood Resilience Institute at the National University of Singapore. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a huge round of applause to welcome our esteemed panelist and moderator. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Prof. Adrian to moderate the session.
Good afternoon. Welcome to our sessions. Maybe I'll introduce myself first. I'm a professor in Singapore. My research is very much into sea level rise and adaptation. And I've also been involved for quite a few years in ASEAN committees related to this topic. My training and my research is very much in engineering. So I really look forward to the session today, which I can learn from the experts about the uncertainties as we go forward. Maybe I'll just opening for a few rounds of questions among the experts, and then after that, I will open for Q&A from you. Okay. Maybe I'll ask the first question. What is, again, I mean, the topic that is really most concerned to us. What are the latest scientific projections for sea level rise, particularly in the ASEAN region? And if we continue the current emission path, how bad would it be? Yeah.
Is this on? Yeah, super. Right, so we're looking at a choice, essentially, which is fundamentally chosen based on our emissions pathway. And this is based on policies we are choosing right now in the next 5 years. And this will lock in the sea level trajectory we're facing in hundreds of years to the future. So the science is getting increasingly clear about this. We've already locked in some sea level rise in the future. This will be between 0.5 meter and 1 meter by the end of the century, according to IPCC AR6. But then in the much longer time frames, the ice sheets, in particular Antarctica, could rapidly accelerate. And this means we have a choice between low emissions between 1 and 3 meters, or looking upwards 6, 7 meters, or potentially more, if these ice sheets begin to really kick off, instabilities are triggered. And in that case, we could be looking at 15 meters by 2300, a meter in the next 70 years or so, and 3 meters early next century. So a fairly fundamental challenge to all of Southeast Asia, Malaysia. The entire region will find this extremely difficult to adapt to, which is why we must focus on the priority, must be decarbonization, emissions reduction to limit the pace and the size of the challenge we have to face.
Thank you. Pam, would you like to add?
Well, I would put it in policy terms, which is sort of where mine is. You know, how much sea level rise do you wish to adapt to? Because that's what we need to be aiming for in terms of mitigation. If you wish to adapt to, 1 meter, say, by 2060, 2070, 2080, then that means that you haven't mitigated enough. If you're willing to adapt to 3 meters, as James said, early next century, then that's what you're going to be facing. The alternative to that is that you're looking at those same levels over hundreds of years, which gives you much more time to adapt. And so the question that policymakers should be posing to one another is not how much sea level rise will come, it's how much sea level rise you want, because that's really within our control still for now.
Thank you. I think these numbers that we are hearing are very concerning. I think for Singapore, for example, we have no land to retreat. So tackling 1 meter by the end of the century, right now we are looking at 1.15 as our projection number. But beyond that, if we are looking at this very scary number, it will be a big problem for us going forward. Next question is, again, as an engineer, maybe I don't understand fully, but how does polar ice melt contribute to this projection, and why should we particularly be concerned about the impacts of climate change in the polar regions? James?
Yeah, so I can help with that. Pleasure to be here. Nice to see everybody. In addition to my work in Exeter, I'm also a visiting professor at the University of Malaysia in Terengganu. So pleasure to be here, and thank you very much. And I've been to Malaysia several times, and it's a wonderful country and great people, and I always like going there. So just to say that. Now the question was on Antarctica's role. You know, why would Malaysia be interested in Antarctica? It's a long way away. Actually, it matters a great deal to Malaysia and lots of other countries in the region, and for two big reasons. Firstly, the polar regions and Antarctica especially act in a manner that tries to cool the planet, right? And if the ice starts to melt in Antarctica, then a very white reflecting surface that bounces solar energy back out into space gets changed by a dark absorbing surface that acts to heat the planet further, retain that heat. So that's starting to happen in Antarctica. And the other reason, which is about sea level, is because the Antarctic ice sheet is absolutely enormous. It's a massive store of ice. And if it starts to change, then the whole world will feel the effects through sea level change. You know, Malaysia, Singapore, right, United Kingdom included. So why does that matter? Well, we've only had about 20 centimeters of sea level rise since 1850. So why are we talking about meters if only you had 20 centimeters of sea level rise? Well, the reason for that is half of that 20 centimeters, so 10 centimeters, has happened because the ocean has got warmer. And so that's only 10 centimeters from the ice. The contribution of Antarctica and Greenland to that 10 centimeters historically is virtually nothing. So it's like, well, why are we worried about it? We're worried because this is the problem. 10 of those 20 centimeters has happened in the last 30 years. So we are seeing sea level rise accelerating. And today, even though historically this has not been the case, today the contribution of Antarctica and Greenland and the glaciers is more than thermal expansion. So from now on, it's going to be the ice. And today also, the contribution of Antarctica and Greenland is more than the glaciers. So from now on, it's also going to be the big polar ice sheets that do the damage. Now, if all the glaciers around the world, they all melted today, but not Greenland and not Antarctica, so that's like 300,000 ice bodies all around the world, sea level goes up by somewhere between 25, 30 centimeters. But if the ice sheets start to change, we start talking about meters. And it's this sort of mobilizing of the ice sheets that we're seeing in the last 30 years that gives us extreme cause for concern in the decades and centuries which come, because as they start to change because of burning fossil fuels, the resulting global warming and the activation of ice sheets and ice loss, then we start talking not of centimeters coming up, but meters. Now the IPCC analysis is quite right that we've got somewhere between half a meter and a meter, but that's within a 66% chance of happening. Right? There's virtually no chance of it being under half a meter. So there's like a 1 in 3 chance it could be higher than a meter this century. And it doesn't stop in 2100, right? It goes on, and that's why we start talking about meters. And that's why James is quite right. It's decisions that we make now will impact the decades and the centuries to come, which is why it's our problem to solve. It's future generations' problems like to deal with, but it's our responsibility to make the right choices. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add to what Martin just said?
Yeah, I can just add a quick thing. So we had some of these panels can be quite stuffy sometimes, right? So just to make sure you understand how big these places are, let's play a quick game. So put your hand up if you think Antarctica is bigger than Malaysia. So go on, audience, up you go. Great. What about, is it bigger than India? Hands up. Yeah. What about America, USA? A little bit less. Yeah. So actually, Antarctica is about the size of the US and India put together. So it's absolutely enormous. And as Martin rightly says, if this begins to really kick off there, we're talking about huge coastline redefining levels of sea level rise. And for places and countries like Malaysia, even just 1 meter of sea level rise will cause coastlines to retreat inland by 10 or 20 kilometers in many regions. So we're seeing the map being redrawn fundamentally. The second thing is that we need to understand from the Earth's past just how sensitive these places are. So the last time that the Earth was as warm as our current NDCs are taking us to, which is about 3 degrees, was 3 million years ago. And at that time, the sea level was 10 to 20 meters higher than it is now. And only 1.5 degrees, which is why the stress has to be on maintaining that low emissions pathway, can slow that rate down to levels and rates that we can adapt to on a long-term basis.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to your initial question, why should Malaysia care, right? And that is one of the reasons that ICCI serves as the secretariat to a group called Ambition on Melting Ice. And what's unique about it, it sounds like it's something that deals with polar and mountain regions, but actually it is about 50-50 countries near the poles, mountain countries, downstream countries, and low-lying countries. And so we have, for example, as members of AMI, Liberia and Vanuatu and Samoa and Senegal, and just earlier today, Palau joined as well. And so that is why these low-lying countries have decided they need to worry about the ice. They need to bring these dynamics to the attention of policymakers and to leaders. This is a ministerial level group, and the hope is ministers talk to ministers and they'll educate each other.
Okay, thank you. I'll go into the next round of questions, which is what factors have contributed to the lower visibility of sea level rise, in your opinion, as a critical issue? And how can we raise its importance in global and regional agendas? There has been some surveys in Singapore, also among the citizens, and sea level rise has not ranked very highly in their concern. Cost of living, etc., is way up there. So given this situation, what do you think we can do? And what do you think are the factors that causes this low visibility, lower level visibility of this critical issue?
Right. Hello, everyone. I think it's like, in Asia, we don't really think about ice, right? It's so far away from us. We're like, Antarctica, Greenland, what's that got to do with me, right? It's out of sight and out of mind. And these guys, Martin spends all the time there and he can see what's happening. For us, we have no appreciation of what's happening, but yet we are the most vulnerable, right? I think that's number one. And also, the other thing is time frame. 2,300 is too far away, right? It's not in my lifetime. I don't have to deal with it, so I don't need to think about it. But if I'm hearing correctly from all the scientists here, right, we could actually see 1 meter before 2100 quite soon. If you look at the board outside the Cryosphere Pavilion, it actually says 1 meter by 2070, could be by 2070 if we continue on our current emissions path, right? We have a chance to change this, but if we continue on our current emissions path, 1 meter by 2070, that's in our lifetimes, right? 1 meter, it means 200 million Asians will be underwater. It will also mean for Malaysia, a lot of our coastal capitals, so that's 11 out of 13 of the state capitals are coastal, will also be inundated, right? Straits of Malacca is very important for trade. A lot of our ports, Malaysian ports, will also be underwater. 1 meter, Port Klang, gone, right? 1 meter, we still have Tanjung Pelapas, we have Pengerang and Butterworth, but 2 meters is a different story. It will also be gone. So we have a choice to make today to fast-track emissions, to keep it in line, right? And also, I think the oil sector here has a big role to play. We stress-tested global oil ports. 2/3 of global oil is shipped. 12 out of the top 15 global oil ports will be underwater at 1 meter. Right? So in a way, we no longer will have energy security if we continue using oil. We would actually threatens it. Right, so we have to rethink our energy resilience. And that will also go the same for gas, coal, if you're receiving all these imports by sea. Right, 80 global airports will be underwater at 1 meter. So even if Malaysia's airport is inland, right, we have to fly to other airports which are not also by the sea, right? So nobody here is an island. We all have to sort of like work together to sort of like protect against sea level rise. And I think, understanding the right levels that, everyone here has been talking about, and stress testing and seeing the risk, because I think when you see the risk at 2 to 3 meters of sea level rise, you would make the you would take the decision to decarbonize. That's a very easy trade-off, right? But if you don't see it, then you're going to say, wow, decarbonizing is expensive. Do I really have to do it? Right? But if you see the risk, you're like, oh my God, we need to hurry up and decarbonize. So I think these are the trade-offs that, but without seeing, we won't know it. And I think globally, there is a movement, also led by Singapore and so on, for banks and companies now mandatory to look at physical risk stress testing. And sea level rise should be in there to the right horizons. And if you can put that in there, then everyone can understand this risk better. And the better we can understand this risk, the more we can understand how fast the ice sheets are melting, the better we can actually adapt to it.
Thank you, Deborah. So again, I think if we look at ASEAN as a whole, there is really a gap between these projections, the scientific projections, and the general public. Right? Many of them are basically just worry about their day-to-day livings, right? So what do you think we can do to drive more proactive action in helping them to understand that addressing sea level rise is urgent? Anyone?
So the issue with sea level rise, of course, is once it's happened, it's already too late. So we must think about preventative measures. Adapting to 3 meters of sea level, but it's not really possible in places. And so habitats, land, livelihoods, they'll be lost. And we need to appreciate how valuable we regard the space at the moment and protect it. And the best way to protect it isn't with a seawall, it's with decarbonizing, right? And getting us on a low emissions pathway to net zero, right, as quickly as we possibly can, because of the co-benefits that gives us. Lots of co-benefits, a healthy planet, healthy people, clean air, cheap energy, all the things that you'll know about and you'll hear about at this conference. They're all true, right? High emissions is the opposite of that. It's like dirty air, terrible lives, and really bad future. So it's an obvious choice that we have to make. Another co-benefit, if you needed one, but another co-benefit, of course, is protecting the polar regions through decarbonising, slowing down their change. There is stuff that's already unlocked. I mean, it's unfortunately, that is the way. 1.5 degrees is 1.5 degrees warmer than it should be. And so there are consequences for that. But if it gets higher than that, then the consequences get really drastic, right? And we've got to avoid them. So there's lots of reasons to do it. You might ask, why aren't we then doing it? If it's so obvious, decarbonising, so many co-benefits, why aren't we just doing it? Right? Well, that's a question that we're all facing. That every year we come back for another COP meeting and ask ourselves the same question. And I've sort of come around to thinking it's because there are measures being put in place to slow it down. There may be some nations, there may be some businesses, there's lots of vested interests that are making huge amounts of money through continuing with a high emission scenario and burning fossil fuels. Right? And we need to call it out. We need to understand that is stopping progress. And we need to get ourselves collectively on the right pathway. And that involves oil and gas companies not doing what they're doing at the moment and translating their, frankly, amazing knowledge and know-how into renewables. And they've got to do that at a much higher pace than they are presently. So our oil and gas companies and countries and things are letting our future down. But they have a real important role to play in this net zero transition. They're just not doing it at the moment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say also a couple of things. I mean, one, of course, is that I think scientists in the past have been a little bit reticent about speaking out about this. And that is disappearing as they get more and more alarmed. And that's really good. So having people like Martin and James who are talking about this with the general public, and here at COPS talking to policymakers, we as an organization really just last year made a concerted effort to have experts from not just ice sheets and sea level rise, but on glaciers, on permafrost, on polar oceans, and on sea ice here all the time, talking to people, talking to media. So that's one thing, is just science communication. The second is communication with policymakers. That happens here. It can happen in capitals. But again, giving scientists the ability to speak to power, you could say, in a way that's respectful and yet very, very clear, and not hedging their bets. One of the things that I'm often telling scientists is, I know you like talking about uncertainty, right? Uncertainty is part of what you talk about. Uncertainty sometimes is how you even get funding, right? If you're going to talk about uncertainty, if you feel compelled to do that, put it in the middle. Don't lead with it, because otherwise a policymaker will feel like they don't have, any reason to speak, to listen to the rest of what you're saying. If you end with it, they're going to discount everything you said beforehand. So put it in the middle if you must speak about it at all, or use the word risk. So that's the second thing. The third, though, is really educating youth and young people. So one thing we have started to do, in addition to things like the State of the Cryosphere report that we put out every year, and coming here to COPS, that's sort of at a kind of high school level, you could say. You could joke about, policymakers, you don't want it any higher than junior high. But regardless, they have shortest attention spans. It has to be easy to understand, but we've started to produce material for schools as well, because almost every child, even if you're living in Malaysia, where you may never ever in your life see a snowflake, understands that ice melts. And ice melts when it reaches 0 degrees or 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a very basic message. And that's the message that we need to get across to young people, because they're the ones, as Martin was saying very eloquently, we're determining what they will have to live with.
Anybody want to add? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so Catherine Hayher has a fantastic saying, which is very true, which is that you have to connect the head to the heart to the hands. So you've got to make people understand the problem, make it connect to them personally, and then give them the tools to do something about it, so they can actually improve it and don't feel powerless. So when we talk about this to policymakers, we need to talk about stories, so things which are happening now, things which are relatable. So for many islands, I've spoken to several people this week who they've grown up and they can no longer grow the food that they've grown up with because the soil is too salty now. They can't get water out of the well they've always used to get water because the water is too salty because of sea level rise. And this means they're having to pay to bring in food which they wouldn't have to pay for in a previous past. So these are impacts that are already happening today. They're affecting people and they're actually real. This is the second point, and it's about relevance. So, of course, it depends who you're talking to. But I think we as scientists need to get much better at putting numbers on things, talking about economics, the cost of inaction, impacting culture. How many of your cultural heritage sites will be wiped away by sea level rise in the future? How do you put a cost on that? And also talking to industries, as Deborah said earlier, the number of ports that we put out of business, how this affects shipping, how this affects your water security long term. So, and finally, this really has to get to the point which is we are locking in these decisions today. And as Martin very eloquently put out, it's a pretty clear choice between a polluted, damaging future or one where we can equally develop together as a world, improve air quality, water quality, and live like this sustainably for hundreds of years to come.
Yeah, I think, we primarily work with business and finance, right? And so in order to push this to them, we are always talking in dollar terms. But I think with the public, there's also a fine line of alarming them and not alarming them, because some of these are very terrifying numbers, right? And I think, if you look back, I think at Singapore's experience, we were just talking about it earlier, the Singapore Prime Minister started talking about sea level rise in 2019, and still today, it's like a slowly thing, right? You can't just dump the public with this, I think. You have to sort of like bring them through a process, and then soon everybody will be on board. But you have to start soon, because we are going to get higher and sooner sea level rise, a lot sooner than we think. And, we thought we had more time to prepare, but we don't really. And I think that's the key message that I'm getting from everybody here on this table.
Okay, thank you all. Let's go to the next round. What are the international governing structures or policies that are already in place to address polar protection? Are they adequate? And if not, what more can be done at the global level?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about in terms of, polar protection. The main polar protection is right here. It's decreasing emissions. It's countries agreeing to implement the Paris Agreement and aiming for that, what is called the lower Paris limit. It talks about 2 degrees, efforts to pursue 1.5. Well, 1.5 really should be considered the red line, because the more we have learned since Paris, the more we realize that 2 degrees is far too high. In Dubai last year at COP28, that was actually a big push by the cryosphere scientific community, and we had over 1,000 scientists signing a petition simply saying 2 degrees is too high for cryosphere, and really trying to get that message out there. There are also, of course, strategies in place to protect the environments of these polar regions. It's national in most cases, for example, for the Arctic countries around the Arctic. They also have some joint agreements, such as, for example, to address black carbon, the 8 Arctic Council nations. Antarctica has a very strong protective system. It is something that is designed to keep it a place of research, growing amounts of tourism, which is really putting a stress on the environment, but still it's meant to be a place of peaceful research only, and that has its own very strong system. But if you're talking about protecting the ice, that play is right here and right now.
Yeah, please.
One more thing to add. So from an Antarctic perspective, we have the Antarctic Treaty, of course, and there's protocol within that, which is on environmental protection. And there are 40-odd countries that are signed up to it, and it guarantees the comprehensive protection of Antarctica's environment. And you might think, well, that's fine. I mean, isn't that pretty much all we need? But there are kind of caveats to it, right? So it turns out, in terms of operations within Antarctica. So if you were a country, no names or anything, just hypothetical, if you were a country that was spewing out fossil fuels, causing global warming, causing the Antarctic ice to melt, so long as that's north of 60 degrees south, that's okay. Because the Antarctic Treaty is only relevant to, the latitudes south of it, which is absolutely crazy. And we know it's crazy, and the countries will know it's crazy as well. It's not even a loophole. It's just wrong. So we have a reason for the Antarctic Treaty Protocol and environmental protection, because we need to protect it. It's just that, and the governance kind of works quite well from an operational perspective. To try and do something in Antarctica, you have to go through all sorts of mechanisms to make sure that it's not going to interfere with the Antarctic, but it's not enough in a global sense. And of course, we know that we live in a globally connected world. In terms of the way that we live on the planet, but importantly, the way that natural processes operate. It's a global world, so it's kind of meaningless to think about this arbitrary line at 60 degrees south. It actually, to the natural world, it means nothing, and we've constructed something that's meaningless. So we probably have to adjust it.
I just want to sort of talk about something completely non-scientific, and I just want to drive home the urgency of what these two are talking about here, because Antarctica warmed by, there was a heat wave, right? the heat wave was plus 40 degrees. Plus 40 degrees is hotter than what Malaysia is normally, right? That is the increment in the temperature down there. And when that happens, and 30 degrees plus abnormalities in Greenland, that's going to melt the ice much faster, right? And when ice and snow and everything melts faster, that impacts Asians faster, right? And we need to start feeling the urgency that is felt in these polar regions.
Can I just add to that? That moment, I think it's March 2022, was absolutely crazy amount of heat going in from Australia, and a sort of high atmospheric flow into the Antarctic continent, and it pushed the temperatures up 40 degrees higher than it should be. It should have been in the middle of East Antarctica. It should have been minus 50. It was more like minus 10. Now, that happened in sort of the springtime, autumn time in Antarctica. If it had happened during the summertime, it may have been possible for the central regions of the East Antarctic ice sheet to be melting. And we know from ice core evidence, that's never happened. It's like the permanent record of ice cores. There's no melt layers in it. So we could have introduced something that is like the first time that would happen over like hundreds of thousands of years. That's crazy, that type of heat. And if we're expecting more, we should be worried. But that's at 1.3 degrees. That's a 1.3 degree scenario. 1.5 is high. We've got to stop it at that point. We can't. I mean, it just gets totally out of hand beyond 1.5, as Pan and others have been saying. So the alarm bells are ringing, right? And we are hearing them. It's like we're not, the fire alarms are going, we're hearing them, we're not getting out of the building. Of course we have to.
And I don't know, Martin, if you've been to an Antarctic Treaty meeting. I've been to a few. We have actually tried to raise these climate issues there, and every single time it gets voted down because, that belongs in the UNFCCC. We can't talk about that here. There are a few countries, though, that are beginning to be open to this. Finland was the host a couple of years ago, and they spoke about this. And next year it will be Italy, and they also are leading with a climate day. We have one of the leaders on that, a wonderful Italian Antarctic scientist sitting here, and perhaps you can comment once I leave.
So thank you. So I'm basically hearing the message that we are not doing enough. We need to accelerate our decarbonization effort. But can you offer some specific perspective actions in terms of what the government should prioritize right now? Deborah, you want to try this? Yeah.
Right. I think, obviously we can't do this without fossil fuels, right? So we definitely need to have that. Number one, we need to rethink energy. If the oil ports are going to sort of be going underwater, if oil pipelines that transport oil through the Arctic and permafrost areas are also going to collapse because of permafrost thaw, then oil flows will be disrupted. And if they are going to be disrupted, then can we look for energy security somewhere else? And that would go for LNG as well. That massive expansion there has to just slow down or stop or reverse. And obviously coal is already tapering off, right? But I want to sort of also highlight the less usual sectors, like the internet sector. We all using ChatGPT in some format now and generative AI, right? That sucks up a lot of power and a lot of water. And Malaysia's just signed 14-point-something billion US dollars of deals with data centers, moving data centers to Malaysia. Now, what is going to power that, right? Is that going to be LNG? That's bad news, right? You should be pushing for renewables for that. However, the internet sector is not a transition sector. So it's not like shipping or cement or aluminium or steel or anything like that, when a bank will sort of say, if I'm going to lend to you, you need to be on renewables. If it's data centers, it's like, oh my God, I'm all in, right? I'm lending without asking the right question. What are you powering these data centers with? And with 25% growth per year in ASEAN for data centers, this is a sector that, yes, it's going to add to our economy. Yes, AI is required, can help climate solutions, but we must absolutely not let it cause more climate issues, right? So we have to table the ICT sector, put it as a transition sector. Malaysia, put it in your taxonomy and so on for green finance, and make sure that, but there's money in this sector. Google, Amazon, etc., they've all committed to net zero commitments, and they're making it. Google, I think, is 60-something% operational efficiency, and they're also now financing nuclear power plants, right, to make sure that their power is clean. But Asia could be doing the same to get them to fast track our emissions transitions for us, rather than suck up coal-fired power plants that we would have pushed for early retirement. All right. So, cheap coal-fired power, early retirement, we need to keep all of that, retire that, switch over, and not let the internet sector suck that up. It's going to be 5 times. I think that sector is about 4% of global emissions now, so it's similar to global shipping. But, with AI, that could balloon to 23% if we don't do something. So, that's like the new oil, right? It creeps in. We need to take care of that.
And if I could add on a bit, I would really get climate nerdy here and encourage people actually to read the IPCC reports, and especially Working Group 3, because what IPCC has done is really laid out what we need to do to stay within 1.5. It's not some, magic that government leaders and the general public need not be aware of. And they lay out all sorts of different pathways to get there that can keep us at or, very close to 1.5 and down actually to about 1.4 degrees by end of century, which is really what we need. And unfortunately, we're losing some of those pathways because we're emitting too much, but there are plenty still to choose from, we hear from IPCC authors. In general, though, what they're saying is what we need to focus on over the next 5 to 10 years is transport and energy sectors. They're the big ones. They're the low-hanging fruits with a lot of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases coming out of them. The harder ones, to a certain extent, are certain industries like cement and steel and agriculture. But even there's a lot that can be done. I'm going to need to, fade out right now because I'm actually going to something focused not on Antarctica, but on the Arctic. And one of the things that we work on is actually use of fire in agriculture. And if you're close to the Arctic, there's not a lot close to Antarctica. Nothing is close to Antarctica, but especially in the Arctic, use of fire in agriculture causes wildfires. You get CO2, black carbon, methane from thawing permafrost that is thawed by the fire. And so it has a real feedback effect. But even fires, our current big project is actually in Ecuador. Why? Because when you burn stubble or anything, number one, you can get a wildfire, but you're getting carbon dioxide emissions. It's not taken up by the greenery in full because you're burning the soil. And a lot of the carbon dioxide, a lot of the carbon coming out of those fires is actually burned soil. It becomes very brittle. It then erodes. The next time you burn, you're burning further down in the soil. And you get an ongoing process of carbon in the soil being released into the atmosphere. So anywhere in the world, that is something that could be addressed very easily through farmer education because the no-fire methods are actually cheaper, they require less fertilizer, and they also require less labor because you're not plowing in most cases, and they contribute to resilience. So these things are out there for each sector, and we simply need to identify them. Every country is different, is going to have a different mixture, but they're there. And with that, with your permission, I'm sorry I didn't warn you, but I actually would like to ask Dr. Florence Coglione, from Trieste, who is an Antarctic scientist, to sort of take my place, if that's all right.
Well, I think let's thank Pam for a very good panel discussion. She has added a lot of knowledge to this session. Let's thanks her for that. Yeah, so welcome, yes. Yeah, so actually, James, would you like to add? We're talking about what are the action that the governments can prioritize right now?
Yes, I think those previous answers have been pretty comprehensive, really, in terms of the actions we can do. I think making it more relevant to the COP here right now is just to stress we have the answers, they're already there. We have the technologies, they're already there. It's literally just about political will to implement these things. And that comes down to putting pressure on leaders, putting pressure on negotiators, and really getting this message out there.
Would you like to add?
Well, I mean, this is what we were saying a little bit earlier. We have some voices, and they must be heard, actually. And also as citizens, we have the power to make pressure on our local administration to direct the investments on the type of industry we want, the type of services we want, and how we want them. So perhaps we're getting used to not using this power or having this power, but the power of the citizenship is really important, and we must go back to it because we have a lot of it, and we must find out that politicians have little of it. So we must use it, and I think this is something we regularly forget, I think. Voice of people, voices of people.
Thank you. Okay, so the organizer has this last question for us before we take some Q&A. And the question is, so we have a fruitful discussion here. How can the outcome from this session, how can we integrate into the ongoing efforts at COP29 and future COPs to maintain momentum in addressing the rising sea level? What should we do to bring this discussion forward?
Well, this is always was and always is and going to be about reducing carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions. Right? That's all it is, and we've known that for ages, and we've got to do it. And so, what are the sort of levers that we might pull that we haven't yet pulled? Because we've kind of tried the sort of persuasion bit. You know, the science is clear. We've told you and everyone. And that hasn't really shifted the dial, right? It's like the head, heart, hands thing that's going on. You know, we've tried the sort of the diplomatic governmental route as well. 29 COPs, right? And if you look at the map of emissions and you say, tell me where the various COPs that made a difference to that are, you can't do it. You actually, economic downturns sometimes have a bit of an inflection, but frankly, no COP has really done that. And so, but they're all important, by the way. You know, the science is necessary, and the government positions are necessary, but clearly in themselves they're not enough. And so, is there another or are there other levers we can pull? Well, there is one, I think, that needs to be considered, and that is regarding the law. And that might be national laws, it could be international laws, and this is how it might play out. So if you have and we know about extreme weather, we know about the environmental and human consequences and the financial consequences of those things, and we can project what they might be into the future. So if you were a country or company that knows about the environmental damage of the products that you're selling, could be oil and gas, could be cement, whatever it is, right? And you know it, but you're continuing to do that, it may be possible, it probably should be possible for your country, your company to be challenged in a court, right? To say you need to pay for the environmental damage that your product is causing because you know it is. You can't claim ignorance because the science is clear, the government positions are all clear, and yet you're still doing it. And so that, of course, if it was established in law, if there were case law established nationally and internationally, might make a big difference because all of a sudden it becomes any country, any company will put that on their risk register. They'll start to think we are liable financially for the impact of our products, and we have to mitigate that. And if you're a shareholder in that company, you'd be worried because if the liability was greater than the value of the company, you haven't got a company anymore. and you lose your money. And so shareholders will say, we need you to reduce that risk. And the way to do that will be to decarbonize. That'll be the only way, in fact, to do it, one way or another. Various ways to do it, and offsetting things, but that will be how to do it. And all of a sudden, the law becomes our friend. It becomes there to protect us. It becomes there to protect our future. And frankly, isn't that what the law is supposed to be doing? It's there to protect us, and it's there to protect our future, but we're not using it in that way. So I think that is a lever that is still there for us to pull.
In Singapore, we are implementing carbon tax. And in fact, it's going to go up quite a lot. Before, Deborah, before you add, I wonder whether that's something that we should try to push the ASEAN as a whole to consider. I mean, of course, you are going to provide your input.
I think carbon tax is a great idea if you can afford carbon tax, right? And I think ASEAN is at different levels of development, right? So I think certain countries can afford carbon tax. And I'm not sure at the levels that Singapore is setting, but I think definitely some form of carbon taxes is possible. But I wouldn't say that would be fair for all ASEAN countries. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I would add money to that. It's supposed to be a finance COP. And I think everyone's been quite disappointed at, the money up for adaptation. But on the plus side in finance, I think a lot of central banks globally are now very worried, clearly, about sea level rise, because it's a risk that they can't diversify from. Because, traditionally banks would lend to different countries to diversify the risk. With sea level rise, pretty much every country is going to be affected by sea level rise, so that's going to be an issue. Also, it's sector agnostic sea level rise, and so it bypasses a lot of the bank's ability to spread risk. And so central banks are actually pushing banks globally to stress test for the worst case climate scenarios. Now, at 3 degrees for their physical risks. Just to give you an idea, in Hong Kong, the Central Bank of Hong Kong, so the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, asked banks to stress test against 0.5 meters of sea level rise, and the coastal flooding and impacts from just 0.5 meters of sea level rise, including typhoon risk, was 32% of 27 banks' property loan books. That is sizable. That would sink the entire financial system, not just in Hong Kong, but globally, because it's so tied, right? And that's not just going to be for Hong Kong. That's going to be for every single country in the region, because Asia is so export trade-led and so coastal. And so if they are seeing these risks at the right levels, they should be able to direct money to the right places. And so, and that should also drive decarbonization. Right now, their decarb and their adaptation strategies are not aligned, but I can see them moving very, very fast. And they're probably the fastest moving, including MAS, right, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, much faster than the government side. And finance has a way of pulling things together globally, bypassing politics to a certain extent, and making it happen. So I feel that at least that process is speeding ahead. So you could definitely use that as a lever to push banks if any of you are working in that space.
Would like to add, James?
Yeah, thank you, Deborah, for linking that a bit back to the COP, what we can do actually here right now. So one thing we would like to do is, if there does end up being a cover decision for this COP, would be to spell this out in very clear language, the impact between the loss of the ice in the polar regions and the cryosphere and sea level rise, the economic damage this will cause. So in previous years, we've got the cryosphere mentioned, but it's more of a tick box exercise where we're saying, okay, we'll protect the cryosphere, we'll protect the hydrosphere, the biosphere, all these things. We haven't linked it explicitly to the damage this caused, the economic cost, impacts on migration, all of these things. So I'd call on all of the countries which have a coastline to really push and support for linking the loss of the ice to the damage it will cause globally.
Any final words? Yeah, before we open up for Q&A.
Okay. Well, I completely support everything that has been said. And in addition, I would say as I was mentioning before, we should really invest into the transition. I mean, we have the money to invest for it and to develop the new technologies, or some technologies that are already there to lower the cost and make it more popular, accessible to the majority and not the minority. I think it's very important that we can do it. We are just not willing to do it. And I think at COP, most of the discussion should also be about pushing the research in some of the domains that are completely accessible for short-term development of this transition.
Thank you. Okay, I think we really have a very good panel discussion so far, but we would love to have your input, so we'll now open for Q&A. Anybody who wants to ask questions? Yes, please.
Testing?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Very interesting discussion. My name is Lilian. I work for the Partnership for Observation of the Global Ocean. I'm 100% with you. And I would like to add that funding observation is also important because it's observing the changes that it's the basing for all the evidence that we provide. I would like to have your personal opinions. I've been coming to COPs since 2017, speaking about the importance of including the ocean on climate negotiations and everything. Personally, I see very little progress on this. I would like to hear from you in the cryosphere science community. How do you see? You've been preaching about the importance of this. Are you seeing any difference?
Yeah, I very much appreciate your frustration. I think for this year it's a bit different for us. So we've been really pushing this in recent years. We have Ambition on Melting Ice, this 26-country group now, as of an extra one joined today, who are pushing the impacts between the melting ice and the damage caused by it globally. And so we work with negotiators, we bring scientists in, we get them to train them, and then we try to work with them to actually suggest and bring in language into these negotiations related to the damage caused by the cryosphere. And this year, observing the high-level segment, we had a lot of talk about glaciers, a lot about snow, the mountains are melting, basically, sea level is rising, microphones are dying. But again, the challenge remains about whether that actually then delivers through into action, right? And so, yes, we are seeing increased visibility, and I hope that it can then lead to action. But again, there's a lot of talking, and actually what gets implemented, we're yet to see. So I think it's still a question I can't answer fully yet, but we're getting there, I hope.
I'll just provide my views. This is, my colleagues have been to COP. This is my first time at COP. I would sort of say initial views are that, ice is, I work in the water space, right? And we've been trying to sort of marry ice and water, and ice in the oceans and water all together, because it's just different types of water risks. It's been difficult. And I would sort of say, I think mountains and snow and fresh water is coming together a little bit more, but I think oceans are still oceans apart. So I think we just need to talk more and I don't know, work better together.
So hi, my name is Will Bealow. I work at the IFC, which is the private sector arm of the World. And I realize I'm not an ocean expert. This lady here has ocean tattooed onto her. And so I realize I'm coming from a different perspective here. So what I'm hearing, though, is, to be fair, I am involved in the climate space and working with financial institutions. And I know that people move when they see there's an advantage to moving first. What you are discussing, isn't that different to what we see in climate in general? There's a real tragedy of the commons. Why should I move first, particularly in the private sector? Is there anything that you can demonstrate about where it does make sense to lean in and be a leader here that would give you an advantage over others?
It's working. So this is it's a really challenging issue because I think you've put your finger on an important point, because if we a country decarbonizes, the world benefits from that. If a company decarbonizes, the world benefits. The world benefits from it. And so is that sort of lack of altruism evident and holding us all back? Well, clearly it is, because we would have done it by then. So are we then saying we will only do this if it's in our own individual interests to do it? Because that feels quite, or if there is a financial gain from doing it. The thing about sea level, of course, we said at the beginning, is that it's retrospective. Once it's happened, you can't stop it, right? So this is preventative. And we need to understand the most sensitive parts of the world, the low-lying Pacific nations, the coastal regions, the investments that we've made in those coastal regions, and recognize that they're in peril. And you can do the calculation and finance on that and work out that it is really in our financial interests for it not to happen. And once you learn that just obvious lesson, right, then that should be enough to provoke us into the common sense thing, which is to decarbonize. And so it's a sort of different mindset, I think, is needed than is traditional in some areas of business, where it's first mover, gives us some sort of ability to compete against our competitors in a better way. It's not like that, and we have to sort of ask a different type of question. If in answering that different type of question, the answer is always no, then we really do have a problem. It's funny, isn't it? Because altruistically and fundamentally, we were always really good in past decades, in past generations, at investing in our future in an altruistic way. And there are so many examples of that around the world. I mean, you can go back centuries to the grand cathedrals and things that were built that are there to last for hundreds of years, and that would cost a fortune to do it. It took decades, more than people's lifetimes, to build, and yet they did that. We can talk about the philanthropic libraries and opera houses and things that were built. Have we lost it? Is that something that our society has now lost, and we're not thinking of? Because that is something that's rather profound, and I think we need to reflect on ourselves a little bit and work out that the art of philanthropy seems to have shifted somewhere. But I'm optimistic, right? And I still think about the right thing to do. I think there is nudging that's needed. I think sort of the legal case is an important consideration. I think an awareness of the legacy we're leaving to our children and them afterwards, that really should be enough to do it. But I'd say, again, what I said at the beginning, there is a break in the process, well, a sort of handbrake in the process, slowing us down. And that is the vested interest, that it's not in their personal interest to cause decarbonising, because they're making too much money out of it. And that's what Al Gore, of course, much more forcefully than I am able to say. He's been saying it for a long time. If we removed that handbrake, we'll be on an accelerated path towards net zero. And that's surely the one that we all know. We all know we need to be on it. And actually, the vested interest is numerically a tiny minority on our planet, but they're making vast amounts of money at our future's expense.
Thank you for that question, Will. I can come back to first mover advantage. I think there certainly is, right? Because I remember when I started CWR 2011, China came out with its 12th five-year plan and said, we will do EVs. And everyone looked at China and went, huh? And we will do renewables. And everyone went, what? And we were like, no, they're going to add 1 terawatt per year. And they were like, what? And now, they're doing it, right? And now they're like the leaders in the space. They out-EV'd everybody else, right? And out-batteried everybody else. But it's a long they had a long vision. They implemented it. Now they're first mover advantage, right? They were not in the front. There were like loads of other people leading at the time. So from a national perspective, there is an advantage to sort of seeing the space and going for it. It's very clear. I think the science is very clear. So the risks are also very clear. And we are also sort of seeing from property developers the first mover advantage in selling the property by the ocean, which they don't think the government is going to protect. Because if I don't sell it now, later I'm not going to be able to sell it, right? They're doing this today because they've stress tested their assets and basically made a decision on, we think that these are the high value areas the governments will protect, and those are not the high value areas that the governments will protect. And are we going to protect it? No, it's going to be too difficult to defend, therefore I will sell this now. So this is already happening today, right? So people are acting on these risks, whether it's clearly not for altruistic reasons, right? But people are seeing it and they are acting on it. And, I think that, there's value to science. And I think in Asia, we still put it in high regard. And if we can see the risks, we will act accordingly. I think that's just human nature. The problem now is that we're not seeing the risks. We've got the science, but we're not translating that into what that means for our lives. Right? You too would sell your property when you look on the map and goes, oh my God, it's going to be underwater, better sell now, right? I mean, that's just our nature. But I think in New York, they've also put in a law now. When you're selling your property, you have to disclose whether or not it will be flooded, that the onus is on the seller. So I think, there's the law, there's money. It's all kind of moving, and some of it is moving in the right direction.
Any burning last question? Yes.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm from Malaysia. I'm just a layman in a sense, but I've been participating in climate change issues for a few years now. And I think I would like to comment on what you said about being able to see the risk. And I think our leaders in Asia especially, I think a majority of them still can't see the risk. In Malaysia, for example, there is an attempt to do so, because I think recently there was this gathering of parliamentarians discussing planetary risk. And slowly, awareness is being stepped up, but I think it isn't enough. There is not enough political will. So in order to improve the situation, I think scientists must tell the politicians about those risks. It's not easy because you can't, as the saying goes, you can't switch off climate change. You cannot simply switch off like you switch off the lights. So it'll take massive willpower and efforts to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much for pointing out this. Sometimes, as scientists, we feel a little bit in between different aspects of this climate change risk and impacts and opportunities and everything. That's true that our role is to get the data, analyze them, but then there is the bridge that needs to be made. So that's why we are coming here, actually, to learn from you, so we can transfer to you. Actually, that's the way it is. But I would like to tell you a little bit about the case of Venice in Italy, because it's a good case study, actually. So to protect the lagoon of Venice and Venice city itself from being flooded, because it is subsiding and sea level is rising, and so they get flooded every high tide, major part of the downtown Venice. So they construct this tide barrier to protect the lagoon. And even though we warned the politician that they should construct an adaptive, vertically, barrier, so in the future, because sea level, global mean sea level would be rising, then this adaptation action would be also adapting in function of the sea level rise. they didn't want it to do that because they didn't believe us. They just say, well, you're just too alarmist, and this is the money we have, dot. But now we know that in a couple of decades, studies have been made, this barrier will be inefficient. And it's already when we have super moon, super high tide, and a storm coming. So it will be useless. And it's impacting on the lagoon ecosystem, fishing, and other economical impacts of the areas. So that's the perfect demonstration of non-understanding, but no will of understanding or real investment to the risks, actually. I mean, even though they were saying in Venice very often, and we say, okay, you should invest on the highest part of the interval of sea level rise of the projections, not on the lowest one. Now they did. It's already visible that it will be useless very soon. So yeah, that's sometimes people not willing to hear.
I have one more comment to make on this. So thank you for the question. That's a great question. And I think ultimately it's about courage. And we need to elect people with courage as leaders. Because how much more is it going to take? Like, what does it require to have some of these guys to actually take this seriously and get the courage to get into action these policies to actually make a difference? You know, are we going to have a whole city go under some sort of wet bulb heat wave where they can't cool down enough so we all overheat and die? Are we going to have to see a city go underwater? Like, what's it going to take? So this goes back to us as power, as individuals, to vote for people with the courage to make a difference.
I would like to add on the making people see this. We produced some fact sheets where we stress test about 190,000 assets in Hong Kong. They were quite effective. So if you want them, I think CT has some of those. And we'll be very happy to also collaborate to make it clearer to the politicians and so on as well. And of course, work with everybody else in this room who wants to drive this conversation faster. Thank you.
This has been a really fantastic panel discussion. Shall we thank all the speakers? All right, so thank you for staying with us. So I think we'll end the session now. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the moderator and panelists. Just before we end, to the audience, just stay in your seats. We're going to grab a group photo. But before that group photo, let's have one with the panelists. If you guys could stand up. Okay, we have our photographer over there. Wonderful. Now let's have one with the audience. If everyone could stand up, and those in the panel, if you could step down. Yes, in front over here. Yeah, you guys can squeeze in the audience. Our photographer is by the door, so if you could all look at him. Yeah, just look at our photographer. Yeah, this is a group picture. So the audience can squeeze in a little bit. Hi, sir, come. Sure. Let's all squeeze in. Okay, big smiles.
Right, 1, 2, 3. One more, 1, 2, 3. Freestyle, please.
Freestyle.
1, 2, 3, freestyle.
Okay, one for the video.
One for the video. If you could wave to the video guy.
All right.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for spending your afternoon at the Malaysia Pavilion. See you guys tomorrow. Our theme would be climate resilience, sub-national leadership, and we have our first session at 10 a.m. Thank you once again, and have a wonderful evening.